podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast with me, James Gray of inews.co.uk and the I newspaper. I'm delighted to say I've got a full cast tonight. I've got George Bellshaw, the acclaimed tennis writer, and I've got the respected tennis coach, Calvin Betton, with me for the first time since, possibly even the first week of Wimbledon. We are all surviving a heat wave. George, tell me about your plans to stay cool.
I don't know about cool. I mean, I'm generally a bit of a cool cucumber, James, so I naturally stay calm under pressure. But what I have been doing today, and I apologise if I sound loud at all, I went to the gym for the first time today since my knee surgery, and then I went for a swim, and I've got a big problem with my ear now. I had to stop swimming after like 10 minutes because I was like actually in pain when I was swimming. I think I've got some sort of ear issue.
Right.
So I've got a bit of a ringing going on. I'm a bit deaf. So if I sound really loud, I'm sure James will adjust the levels. But yeah, I'm struggling to hear at the minute. So that's not really that conducive to podcasting.
I mean, I have to say, even for you, impressive turnaround to recover from one injury and pick up another one. Like, first training session back. And to pick up such an obscure one as well. I mean, that is Owen Hargreaves levels.
I'm hoping it's like a wax issue and I can just go and like stick some stuff in it.
Okay, George,
tomorrow.
I think you need to stop talking about earwax. That is not something we need on this podcast. Calvin, meanwhile, is calling us from the NTC in what can only be described as his Top Gear outfit. Top Gun outfit, I should say. Resplendent in tank top and freshly shaven bonds. Calvin, how is the NTC? It looks warm.
It's very, very warm. Very warm. I've just walked up from... I've been nipped into central London today because I've not had any time off during the week. Been watching singles and doubles and finishing late. So I took a bit of a walk into central today and it's a absolute sweat pit in central and on the walk back up from Barnes Station.
Just to paint the picture for listeners, Calvin's literally got guns like Rafa Nadal sticking out at the minute. He's just lacking the headband. And Rafa's on his way to the same hairstyle, so I reckon a bit more of a tan Calvin. You're on your way to a kind of knock-off impressionist.
They're lacking the headband and the thing why the headband is required.
I have to say, Calvin, I'm quite impressed. I'll be honest. I didn't think you had the sort of gun show in you, so I give you some credit.
Well, I think the camera might be exaggerated. Yeah.
This week it's Tropicana he's drinking, not Vimto or whatever it was.
Well, it's usually Coca-Cola, as regular listeners know. Calvin,
Had a couple today.
Okay, good. Let's crack on with some tennis, shall we? Because this is all getting very strange. We do have lots to talk about. We haven't had Calvin on since the final weekend of Wimbledon because he's been super busy, and we can maybe talk a little bit about how busy he's been this week. We need to talk about Novak Djokovic. We need to talk about Nick Kyrgios, Elena Rybakina, and a little bit of Ons Jabeur as well. We'll also catch up with our fantasy Wimbledon winners. I've heard from all of our top three so far, who have all done really well, and a couple of also-rans as well. Andy Murray's back in action over in Newport. Dominic Thiem is, and I hesitate to say this too excitedly, winning matches again, and Maria Sharapova has had a baby. So lots of good news going around in the tennis world. Let's start with Wimbledon. We, of course, saw Novak Djokovic beat Nick Kyrgios, and we saw Elena Rybakina beat Ons Jabeur. Calvin, of those two results, which would you say is more kind of seismic? Is it Nick Kyrgios getting to a Grand Slam final, or is it Elena Rybakina kind of making some sort of entrance to the elite scene?
There's a chance that neither happens again. I think in terms, I'm probably not answering your question too much, but I think it's highly more likely that Rybakina wins another one than Kyrgios makes another final. Because I think, strangely, he must have been the only person ever in a post-match interview who said that he didn't want to get to another final.
And he said that he thought he would lose motivation if he'd won it, which, in fairness, is a thing that has happened. You know, Dominic Thiem's talked about that, winning his first Grand Slam and then getting this big kind of deficit of motivation. What do you make of, Calvin? I know you will have missed the final because of other engagements, but in terms of Elena Rybakina's game overall, in this era when we've got quite a lot of power hitters going around, is she good enough to compete with them?
Yeah, I think she's in the mix with that group of. I think you have the top tier of players, which is, even though she's not ranked there, I would say still Osaka. Obviously, Swiatek. They're probably, I think, still the two best tennis players in the world. And I'd say that Rybakina is in that next tier below them. Probably higher than some of the players who are ranked higher than her. I mean, I think she's better than Jabeur, and I think she's better than Badosa.
I think she's better than Arina Sabalenka as well, who's probably still ranked higher than her.
Sakari as well.
I think. Well, who are you going to say? Kontaveit, yeah. I mean that's well number 2, isn't it? All over the front. And also, I'm kind of starting to think about Garbiñe Muguruza. I mean, I might have missed something about Garbiñe Muguruza lately, but she's in absolute pieces. I mean, she's really just completely lost it, and I don't know whether there's more going on.
She was in tears, wasn't she, in her Wimbledon loss, and she was bageled, wasn't she? She was going down, and all is not right there at the minute.
She did post something on social media, but really just saying, it's been really difficult and it's been horrible, and I hope I can get better again. But she didn't talk about anything specific. As always, and just maybe not as always, but in this case, I do wonder whether there is more going on than we're privy to, and it's just a guess. Yeah,
I'm sure. I mean, look, if we're talking about pure talent and ability, Muguruza is right up there. Like she has everything in her game. But as we've seen, and again, you're right, James. This isn't meant as a criticism because we don't know exactly what's going on right now, and I suspect there is something going on off court. But there've been lots of times in her career where there've just been these huge dips where the focus hasn't been there. She's absolutely brilliant when she's on a day, and she can beat anyone, and she can mix it with. I think she's someone who could hit through Swiatek. She can come to the net brilliantly. She's got some of the best volleys in the women's game. She's got really everything about her, but the application, or at least the focus and dedication, hasn't always been there. The execution, So
I also think you say she's great at the net and comes forward a lot. She doesn't come forward as much as she used to. She really
not enough.
I remember watching her at Wimbledon. Well, I seem to remember watching her with you, George, maybe against Svetlana Kuznetsova out on court 2 in a really good match. And what was great about it was Muguruza was willing to come forward and roll the dice and usually do it pretty judiciously, and was brilliant at it. And I just feel like she's just lost nerve in that, which I suppose does happen when you're playing dreadfully.
She's technically, probably, I think that Calvin may have a different view, but I think she's got technically the best volleys in the women's game. They are really, really. It's a solid shot, and you're right. Like she should use that more often than she does, but she's also pretty bloody good at the back of the court. So when a game's firing, she has everything.
But also, there's a saying in poker which is do the opposite of your table, which is when your table's really aggressive, be very tight, and when everyone's very tight, be very aggressive. And I do think sometimes tennis is like that. If everyone's doing one thing and you're able to do the other. Do the other. Be the difference. Be the kind of the hipster of the tactical scene. I don't know, Calvin. I suspect you're going to say that actually the quality of, and I would agree with you, the quality of forecourt play in the women's game at the moment is not high.
It's not. No, it's not very high in the men's, to be honest. There's not many great volleyers around for one reason or another. Which makes there's two schools of thinking about that though. The one is that it's maybe done, that we won't see a comeback of great volleyers anymore, that the modern game doesn't lend itself to that kind of play for various reasons. And the other one would be that tennis and any sport is cyclical, and it will come back to a stage where we'll get a great volleyer and they'll be very, very good because they can do something that the rest of the players can't.
I suppose, if you were Calvin tasked with, if someone came to you and said, right, you're in control of tennis and your task is to get volleyers back into the game, are there things that you would do to change the conditions to make that happen? Make courts faster or lower or balls lighter? What's the way to do it?
Yeah, the courts being faster would certainly help. That's one thing. Although there is an argument that the players are hitting so big now that it would be tough, other than behind a serve, it would be tough to actually get into the net because everyone hits so big anyway. But look, you're not going to get more volleys on the courts at the speed that they are now in general. I mean, we've just played at Wimbledon, which historically is supposed to be the fastest surface, but I can tell you from experience, it's not very fast.
I did briefly mention this McEnroe document last week, but I'll tell you what, there were some clips in that. I can't believe how good his volleys were with those rackets. I mean, they were outstanding. He had such amazing touch around the net. I mean, you just don't see things like that.
I mean, I'm more. It's a strange one, isn't it, that we talk about this GOAT debate all the time. But I was discussing this with somebody last week that we seem to have this obsession now in tennis and in sport that you do everything by numbers, and that the GOAT is, in inverted commas, the GOAT is whoever wins the most. But I don't look at it that way. I don't look at any sport that way. I look at who was the best when they were at their best. And for that reason, I actually still think McEnroe is the best tennis player ever, because at his best, not for a short period of time, by the way, because we get this thing and people go, it's about longevity, though. McEnroe was at his best for a good 8 years. That's a long period of time. And I think McEnroe playing at his best beats anybody else.
I would say I would agree with you, Calvin, in terms of judging players, and I always talk about this in sport. When people say who's the best sportsman of all time, who's the best athlete, I say I don't care. Who's the most dominant athlete of all time? That is a good question, George.
I was actually going to say you can answer the first GOAT debate with McEnroe as well, though, because no one's in the men's game has won more singles and doubles titles combined. So if you want an actual numbers argument for him, he's top of the class there as well.
I think it comes into one of those, though, where it's like people talk about, oh, he hasn't won 22. But it's not like somebody who won one. He has 8, I think. I think he has 8 slams. Like, it's a sizable amount. I think once you've gone beyond the sort of 4 or 5, you're in the mix then. And I do think that him at his best, and I think 1984 was when he was probably at his best. It's recognised.
He's got the best percentage win in a season as well, doesn't he? I think he certainly. There's an argument of hitting the highest peak from that alone. Yeah,
he was so dominant. I to the extent where players couldn't live with him. He was that good. He couldn't live with his serve. His serve was so good, and he played and still he's a completely unique player as well. There's updated versions of Bjorn Borg and Lendl and Sampras. There's never been another player who played like John McEnroe.
Who are the updated versions, would you say, of Bjorn Borg and even Lendl? I mean, I know about Sampras, but the other two I'm not.
I would say it's Nadal and Djokovic.
Right.
I would say Nadal is definitely Borg. The way because Borg basically invented topspin, and was an aggressive player, a baseline player, but aggressive with it through the topspin.
Right.
Djokovic and Lendl was a very, very solid, unbreakable, mentally tough match player who didn't miss much, and that is Djokovic. He probably had a little bit more power than Djokovic, hit with a bit more power than Djokovic, but I'd say they're your 2 updated versions.
Well, maybe wait to talk about the documentary until you guys have watched it. But one of the things I didn't know about, because obviously, Calvin, I'm a little bit younger than you. It wasn't my generation, so I actually found a lot of the stuff that was in there kind of quite new. But there's this amazing match they focus on a little bit in the French Open. I think it was in '84. I think it was the only slam match he lost that year against Lendl. I mean, that was an astonishing match. Like,
there's actually a documentary just about. There's a documentary just about that match. I think it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's actually a bit arty, and it's not. Yeah. It's a bit arty, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, but parts of it are interesting. It's just about that one match. I think it's made by a French guy, but yeah.
I'll tell you something interesting. I'll tell you something interesting about 1984 French Open is that the men's quarterfinalists were seeds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. Yeah. Then you know who let down the side? It was Jose Luis Clerc of Argentina, the number 8 seed, who lost to the number 9 seed, Sundstrom. Henrik Sundstrom. I can't say I know exactly or even remotely who that is.
And also, I think it's worth saying, going back to that era as well, that again when we're counting up slam wins, I don't think McEnroe ever played Australia. Or he certainly didn't play very much.
He definitely played it because he got kicks out of it one year, but that was kind of later.
He did,
I
when
think
he
it might have been 91.
Yeah.
He played it. Yeah,
He didn't play it then. It was at the end of the year. It used to be at the end of the year, and players didn't play it.
So McEnroe, just to kind of tidy up the stats here, McEnroe won 7 Grand Slams, 4 US Opens and 3 Wimbledon. His best ever French was getting to the final in '84, where he lost to Lendl, having been 2 sets up. And he played the Australian Open just 5 times. He didn't play it at all until 1983. He got to the semis in '83 and then played it in '85, '89, '90 and '92. So, yeah, it just wasn't... I mean, when did it go from hard court to grass, for example? And then, obviously, you've got the switch of... It used to be at the end of the season in December.
Yeah.
And obviously, it switched into the beginning of the season, which I suppose probably affects whether people wanted to go as well. Like, you can imagine the end of the season, sod that.
But I think as well, James, tying into that as well, that basically the year-end finals used to be at Madison Square Garden, and that was seen as, back then, that was seen as much more important than the Australian Open.
Right.
So I think it's then, I don't know how many of those McEnroe won. I don't know whether you've got that.
That is going to be a hard stat for me to find immediately, but that's certainly... I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I was reading some kind of arguments on a forum today about how important year-end finals is, and basically someone was making the point that fans are much more obsessed about year-end finals than, say, Djokovic is. But I think actually Djokovic has talked about year-end finals quite a lot. Of all the tournaments he's talked about, and maybe it's because he can't play the US and he can't play the Aussie at the moment, but I do feel like players take it reasonably seriously. I mean, the prize money alone's worth it, isn't it?
I think it's, like I say, I think back pre when the Australian Open went to Melbourne in January, the players definitely saw the Madison Square Garden one, because it was at Madison Square Garden as well, the greatest arena in the world. And it was held there at the end of the year, and they saw it as being, I'd say, more important than the Australian Open for sure. But I think it sort of changed around when there's a big push to say that we had 4 majors, and the Australian was one of them.
McEnroe won 3 Masters, well, as it was called then, the Masters, in 78, 83 and 84. And just to tidy up, because I couldn't remember when the Australian Open went grass to hard, it was 87 was the last year of grass Australian Open, which obviously was sort of just probably at the back end of McEnroe's career. But George, we'll have to talk about that documentary, because I'm really looking for... I think my missus is probably quite keen to go and see it. Basically because we watched a sitcom which some people know called Never Have I Ever, which is it's quite good, sort of comedy show about this Indian girl in high school. It's kind of a classic high school comedy with a bit of an Indian twist. But McEnroe does all the voiceover work, so he narrates the whole show. There's like 6 seasons of it. It's I don't know. I mean, it's not necessarily for tennis fans, but if you want a familiar voice doing it, I would suggest that he's more informed in that when it's scripted than when he's commentating.
He is just an interesting guy as well, isn't he? I mean, there were so many different angles to it. I actually read a review about the documentary today just out of interest to see how it was going down, and one of the things they kind of criticised was it just didn't do any of his later life, where he's also been quite an interesting public figure and stuff. But yeah, I'm sure everyone will enjoy it, so I'd highly recommend. And yeah, we'll put some time in and have a think.
It's out tomorrow, I think. I'm right in saying.
His first autobiography is one of the very best sports books I've ever read as well. He's written 2. The second one isn't that great. The first one I think is called Serious.
Right.
And it's very, very truthful, very forthright, and it's an excellent book.
I think it is called Serious, and like subtitled "You Cannot Be" or something. And I only know that because I wrote something during Wimbledon about Nick Kyrgios, and I said, people call Nick Kyrgios the modern day John McEnroe. A, he's not as good as McEnroe, and B, he hasn't got a catchphrase yet. And I think if I was like in Nick Kyrgios' circle, I'd be like, look, mate, shout at umpires all you want, but you're going to have to keep saying the same thing. You need something that we can put on a T-shirt so we can actually make some money out of this. Because couldn't you imagine how much money John McEnroe's made out of just I would be amazed if he hasn't copyrighted it yet. That would be the real answer, would be to copyright it. Anyway, we got sidetracked slightly, but I'm okay with that.
Just a little.
We're recording this on a Friday night, and I think that's the kind of Friday night pod it should be. Yeah. But we should talk a little bit about Novak Djokovic, because we have already. as I say, as we spoke about on Sunday, he's currently out of the US Open and the Australian Open, but he is just one slam behind Rafa Nadal. Calvin, we just talked about the GOAT and the numbers. I mean, the reality is that if Djokovic doesn't pass Nadal, which, depending on how the politics of things go and how long Nadal hangs on, it's not impossible that that happens. And then all of a sudden, this GOAT conversation gets quite difficult for people who want Djokovic to officially be the GOAT, doesn't it?
I guess, yeah. But I am informed by the Australian players and coaches that I know that they think he will be at the Australian Open.
That's very interesting. Presumably because, from what I've read, the political sort of appetite to stop him being there is much less than it was, right?
Yeah, and I also think it's probably fair that I don't agree at all with his vaccine stance, but from a logical point of view, you struggle to make an argument as to why he shouldn't be in. The reason why you basically, he's, for anyone who doesn't know, he has a 3-year ban because he was refused an entry last year.
Yeah.
But it was a sort of quite of a unique situation why he was refused entry last year. And by the sounds of it, not entirely, and I put entirely in very inverted commas, his fault. So I think the feeling is that some logic will preside and he'll be there. But the US, I'm not so sure. I don't know.
Do you have Rafa to win the US Open, Calvin?
No, I don't think you can you? Didn't look.
You have
his body
Medvedev?
looked pretty. Yeah, I still think Medvedev's probably favourite for that one.
I think the way Medvedev... George, calm down. We'll get to that. I think it's interesting. Medvedev played so well on grass. Obviously he didn't play Wimbledon, but he played so well on grass as we didn't necessarily expect him to, that it's put me in a state of mind where I'm like, Medvedev is a pretty hot favourite for the US Open. Despite that being... I suppose that's not hugely controversial, given that he's, world number 1 and got to the final of the last hardcourt slam. But it's going to be a weird slam. I think we'll feel a lot better about it once we've had, the Rogers Cup in Canada and we've had the Cincinnati Masters and a little bit more to kind of give us some form, and I'll be able to get my model going again. But I just do feel a bit weird about the US Open at the moment.
Just on Medvedev. Medvedev is, getting to that stage on a hard court where you're really looking over best of 5 sets at about 4 players who can actually imagine beating him on those courts.
Nadal,
Rafa,
Djokovic, McEnroe.
Novak. I think Zverev, when fit, possibly would give him a go right now. But he'd be in my 3. I don't think Tsitsipas beats Medvedev on hard courts, really, at the minute.
No, I don't think. I almost don't think he gets that near him. I don't know what their head-to-head's like, and I know they've got a bit of beef, but I can't imagine. I'm just looking at their last 3 meetings. So Tsitsipas hasn't beaten him on hard since the ATP finals. He beat him on clay at the French Open last year,
and that's a very different hard court to the US Open.
Yeah, that was 2019 as well. So that was in London. I think 2 Australian Open
above
wins.
3 then? Who? I can't even think of it before.
Alcaraz.
I didn't say Alcaraz.
Alcaraz. Yeah, fair comment.
In terms of someone who can, not necessarily someone who wins.
I'd still back Medvedev in that match for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'd back him against Eddie though. I think he's favourite against Djokovic at the minute. I'd actually think Nadal's probably the one who you'd think he struggles with most. There's
a mental issue there. He should have beaten him in Australia. Let's be honest. He was. It was killing him to start with, but there is a mental hold in that match, and
I don't really
when it goes away.
I don't really remember the Nadal Medvedev match in Mexico, which was 3 weeks after the Australian Open final, and Nadal beat him 3-3, just absolutely crushed him. But I don't really remember the match.
He was a bit off it those weeks after the Australian Open, though, wasn't he? And he did have... Was it a hernia he had eventually?
Yeah, which obviously he took care of in the clay court season. So I suppose, he could have been suffering with that at that point. I'm sure he said when it started, but I suppose he may have already had a bit of bit of a problem in that area. But yeah, I mean, it would be great, and I'm just thinking about the seedings, and I suppose we've got a pretty good chance of getting a Medvedev Nadal final in the US Open. I mean, look,
It was great in 2019.
Yeah, and I think it would be, and it was great at the Australian Open as well, by the way.
Yeah.
I was watching a couple of points from that popped up on social media the other day, and it was just, you forget that, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, Rafa is the most box office of all the players. Like, you know, Andy Murray's great to watch for some reasons because he always makes it a battle. And Djokovic is great to watch because of that flexibility and his engagement with the crowd. And Federer is great to watch for the grace. But Nadal has a bit of all of that and this kind of court presence and this charisma on court that I don't think anyone can match.
He's the best in close matches. I maintain there are bad Nadal matches when he's just rolling someone on the clay. But in a close match at a slam, he's I think the best ever. Possibly.
When he beat someone like 3-1 and love at Roland Garros, yeah. Because he doesn't, you know, he doesn't bully them in points necessarily. I mean, he does bully them, but it's not like that takes an hour and a half. Like
it gets drawn out, yeah. That's what I mean. It's not a good watch, really.
Yeah, it's a slow kill.
Federer against bad opponents, that is good.
Yeah, well, quite. And Calvin, as I think you said before, Rafa Nadal, the best swerver of a tennis ball in the game.
Yeah, best swerver of a tennis ball, best love 30 player of all time. Amongst other things. Best fist pumper of all time. Best knee raiser of all time.
Yeah, the good knee raise fist bump. It's important to have that right.
We've sort of touched on Federer a little bit there. How damaged is Federer by Novak's latest win? Within him at Wimbledon.
He doesn't have a ranking now.
Slams.
He's an unranked
I think
player.
I've got a bit of a theory on this that actually Nadal. I don't know whether everyone agrees on this, but Nadal actually going above and being in the lead has kind of diminished this idea that whoever ends up with the most is the best. Because everyone just thought it would be Federer or Djokovic that ended up with the most when Federer had the lead and Nadal looked pretty short. But I don't think it's that damaged by it. I think people have already made their mind up on Federer. You either think he's the best or you don't.
I think my specific claim about it would be that there's long been this kind of compromise theory, if you like, that Djokovic is the best hard court player of all time, Nadal's the best clay court player of all time, and Federer's the best grass player of all time. Djokovic is really threatening to damage Federer on that. He's got a winning head-to-head against him on grass. He's one Wimbledon title away from him. Realistically, it's quite easy to see Novak winning the next two. I mean, he's streets ahead of the rest of the field on a grass court at the minute. If he passes him on that, I think that's really, really damaging to Federer's
because we come back to it again though, George. I don't necessarily think it is because like you're comparing two different things because he's won more. Like it's different eras. Like Federer has, for example, like I said there, McEnroe only has 3. Pete McEnroe would beat Djokovic on a grass court.
I would watch it. I mean, for sure.
He'd come to on the old grass courts on the same thing, and like if
the grass courts haven't changed that much in Federer and Djokovic, have they? And they have played each other enough times for. Djokovic.
I still think they've changed quite a bit in the last 2 or 3 years, even. It's now a hard court. Everyone's used to be. It went from being a fast grass court to a slow grass court to a hard court, which is what it is now.
It's very hard argument to make the Djokovic versus Federer on grass thing because, like, the final they've played 3 times in finals, right, at Wimbledon, and Djokovic has won all 3 of them, which you'd think is like an absolutely dominant stat, but like 2 of them went to 5 sets. The third one, 2019, went to a 5th set tiebreak, so that's basically a coin flip. The 2015 one is the only one where you're like, well, that was pretty one-sided, but even that had a 22-point tiebreak in the middle of it. So, I do think Calvin's right. It is different eras. I think the thing that a lot of Djokovic fans will say is, and this always gets levelled at Federer, right, is the people he beat to win his titles. Whereas like Djokovic's finals to win his titles at Wimbledon are Nadal, Federer, Anderson, Berrettini, and Kyrgios. So like, there are some easier ones in there than others,
In fairness, there's only three tough ones. Four, yeah. Federer who's Federer beat? One against Murray.
Yeah, Philippoussis, Murray once, is that right?
Nadal, he's got one against Nadal.
But like Roddick, you probably put alongside Berrettini, right? In terms of ability.
No, I'd put him ahead of Berrettini. He's won a slam, being world number one.
But Berrettini's career isn't over. Like because it's always difficult to judge during, but that's the inevitability of like trying to judge things. But if you consider that Berrettini might well win a slam and might well make world number one day, then you kind of compare those. Who else is Federer?
If he does, fair enough. But at the minute, Roddick's definitely got to be higher up on the all-time list than Berrettini.
So Federer, to run you through them again, Philippoussis, correct. 3 Roddick, 2 Nadal, 1 Murray, 1 Cilic. So you would kind of say the Cilic, the Philippoussis, and I don't know. Cilic, I would kind of...
Kyrgios and Anderson have never won slams.
And never even been close.
I think if you consider Roddick was basically made to retire by facing Novak Djokovic on grass, that was the moment he realised my career is completely done. I think that puts it into context.
You can't put people at the end of their career and go.
But he was only 30. Yeah. He's the same age as Federer. Djokovic put him out to pasture.
Federer beat peak Roddick. On peak Roddick was a good player.
Yeah. You beat him in back-to-back finals.
I'll tell you something. Pete Roddick was better than Nick Kyrgios. It's a different league to Nick Kyrgios. A different league to Kevin Anderson. George has got this now idea in his head that Djokovic is that he doesn't want people to think that Federer is better than Djokovic on a grass court because he just doesn't want to think it.
I think it's just an interesting question because I just think like everyone in their mind thinks Federer is the king of grass, and that's been like an indisputable fact.
I don't think he is the king of grass. McEnroe is better than him on grass.
In the 21st century, Calvin.
Sampras was better than him on grass.
Not in the 21st century though.
No. He went in 2000.
Who won Wimbledon?
He lost to Federer in 2001, didn't he? Did he win it again in 2002? No, he won it in 2002. Did he win in 2002?
He won it in 2000, Sampras.
He retired in 2001.
So it depends on whether you consider a decade starting.
I'm not, George. I'm going to
into this.
The thing what always gets undervalued in this though is that because people want to see the rivalry of Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer's longevity is astonishing as it is. Federer was past his best when Djokovic came on the scene. Like he just maintained if we imagine him like his peak, he went up to his peak was before Djokovic came, even before Nadal came on the scene. And then he had a very slow decline. Wasn't a fast decline. And he was very good a few years ago. But Federer in 04-05 was the best Federer by a mile. And that's the period where you could have an argument that he was the best player ever.
And of course,
I always thought 6 might have been his best season on paper. I might be wrong there. I feel like
6
I did look at this a long time ago.
And either way,
I remember watching him in the US Open final in 05. He beat Agassi, and it was maybe the most perfect tennis I can imagine. He was hitting the ball hard and on lines, and I realised then the game had moved on.
I'm going to start the second part of today's Love Tennis podcast with me, James Gray, him, George Bellshaw, and Calvin Betton, by congratulating a couple of fantasy Wimbledon stars. Huge congratulations to Miss Hit, who says, can't even explain how stupidly happy this makes me. Been bragging to all my friends who don't even like tennis because her team, Fast Wheels and Big Weapons, has won our fantasy Wimbledon game. By just a point in the end. It was, I think, the pick of Ayla Tomljanovic in the end.
Good pick.
Really good pick. Just to run you through her team, it was Djokovic, Berrettini, Van der Zandschulp, Kyrgios and Denis Novak, Ons Jabeur, Coco Gauff, Petra Kvitova, Ayla Tomljanovic, and I can't remember her first name, but her surname is Święcka, the Polish qualifier. Maja Święcka. I think she just won one match. as it was. But that's 3 points, 3 valuable points, and that was. I mean, they all count, George. They all count. Not that we know, because we didn't get any points.
Well, I was going to say, you missed me off the list of congratulations, as I was the highest scoring pod member.
I mean, I got beaten by your girlfriend, who, as far as I know, doesn't know anything about tennis, and she beat me by a whole point, which, I mean, is...
Did Calvin forget to enter? Have we clarified this yet?
No, I entered. Just didn't do any good.
What was your name?
Yeah, what was your team name?
I forget. Can't remember.
Convenient for Calvin. I mean, it was pretty carnage, to be honest. I think that's our lowest ever winners total of 46.5, which is no disrespect to fast wheels and big weapons. Strong recommendation, highly commended to SebMax33, Seb Servers, who says, I had two 50-50s, Isla versus Bianca and Amanda versus Beatrice Haddad-Meyer, and of course went for the worst performing in both because I thought their draws were easier. And Hipster Tipster 8 came in third. I'm also going to give a shout out, which I don't often do for fourth place finishers, but Hanya Getani, I think, is quite a new listener to the pod, and is very active on Twitter, who says, can I be considered a bronze medalist? I'm afraid, Hanya, you cannot, but fourth is very commendable, given I think that's your first time playing. What's that?
Wooden spoon? Is that what you're
No, I think wooden spoon is probably for me, for last of the identifiable pods, given that Calvin has sensibly disappeared into anonymity. But anyway, thanks very much for playing, all 231 of you, which only represents about 10% of our podcast listeners. But if you want to get involved for the US Open, there will be another fantasy game, and it will be even more heavily contested. I will have a model for that one as well, so I'm much more confident. Looking back at Wimbledon as a whole, has it been a success is the big question. It had massive viewing figures, I think 7.5 million for the men's final, 3 million here in the UK for the women's final as well. I know that the attendance figures were down about 10%, George, but I think that on 2019 that is. What would you put that down to?
That is a good question. I think one of the big issues around ticketing this year was the fact that they were all sold from 2020. So there was like a big hangover of tickets that said it was sold out a long time ago. So I think that may have added some confusion, probably a rise in COVID as well. I mean, I don't know. That's all kind of speculation. But I know a lot of people I spoke to who had talked about maybe getting tickets were like, oh, we're actually going to try for next year because this has been sold out from 2020. In terms of the broader question, was it a success? I would say it was on the whole. I think you had a lot of things that got people talking, which is always good for a tournament. I think I read that there were 25 million viewers in total for Wimbledon, kind of UK viewing figures, which you can't really sniff at, to be honest. That's a pretty decent wedge of the population, or at least
what people outside the UK might not know, or probably do, but I'll mention it anyway, is that the Wimbledon is broadcast by the BBC here in the UK, which means it is free to air for everyone. It's free to stream on the BBC website. It's got a massive catchment, and it's so important. I think the BBC have just signed up for another 5 years as well. It's such an important part of Wimbledon's kind of legacy to try and reach as many of those people as possible. Calvin, you obviously spent time inside Wimbledon this year. I'm sure it was much better than last year when you were in a bubble and having to live a weird kind of existence. But how did you find the tournament experience as a whole? I mean, am I right in saying that was your first normal Wimbledon as a coach, or have I got that wrong?
No, I went in 2005 with a player I did a lot of travelling with. Yeah, it was good. It was good to be back. It was enjoyable. Doubles coaching life in there is a bit strange because you don't get to actually see much, because the doubles practice courts are really basically, you get 1 hour in the morning maybe, and then you generally want to practice another hour later on, and it's usually after 5 o'clock. So it's 5 till 6, 6 till 7, and the practice courts finish at 7. So you kind of don't really get to see much. I didn't actually wander around watching any tennis much at all until the day when Henry and Julian had lost, and then I had an hour just walking around the grounds and watching. Spend most of the time on the practice courts.
Do you find it still has this sort of buzz, the prestige? Because what fans will know of Wimbledon is going to the grounds and it feels special. Does it feel special behind the scenes as well?
Yeah, I think so. It's not my favourite tournament, as I've expressed before. I've said before, I think it's a corporate event with a bit of sport going on. But it definitely does have a buzz there. There's no doubt people want to do it. People are willing to go and spend way more on some Pimm's than they can get in any bar in London, where Pimm's isn't cheap there either. But somebody made a point to me, the only thing in Wimbledon that's good value for money is the strawberries.
Correct.
I actually have to say, I had a bottle of wine on the second Thursday I came, and it was only £24.50, which I was astonished.
The thing is, George, that you have to remember we've been living in London for quite a long time, and
But I think if you go to a restaurant, you'd expect a bottle of wine normally to be around the
again,
20
George.
quid
I
mark.
think you need to spend more time back in Birmingham.
Birmingham's expensive now. Every time I go back, I get annoyed how expensive it is. I was meant to be going to Leeds next week, so maybe that would have been a bit cheaper.
Leeds is not that cheap. Calvin will tell you better.
It's cheaper than London. But it's not.
I mean, yeah.
Go for Barnsley on the way there, George. Then you'll find out how much bottle of wine.
I'm not going anymore, Calvin. It's been cancelled because of the extreme weather in the UK. Which
Oh wait, is that really why?
yeah,
No, but
that's
serious,
really why I'm not going.
I've just got on the tube. I just get on the tube on the way back. Every 2 minutes, they're putting out tannoy warnings because of the extreme weather. Commuters are advised to only travel in exceptional emergency circumstances.
Yeah.
Monday, there's a warning about because the temperatures are meant to hit so high that even normal in inverted commas, people not normally with kind of health defects are likely to be under threat. So they've reduced all the services. They've cancelled our day up there that we're meant to be doing. It's a shame.
Do you reckon? I mean, I think it won't even be hard to find that there are people already with their tin hats on saying that this is some sort of conspiracy to keep us all in our houses and to keep us under the thumb of the man. I mean, I reckon there are
people who just say climate change isn't real, so I'm sure they're already there.
I'm certain that it's somehow related to the vaccine.
5G networks warming us up there.
I'm just checking one specific Twitter account to see if it's penetrated a certain group of fans.
I think we all know who that would be.
It's not been mentioned yet, but I only feel it's not going to be that far away. Oh, I have just found a Bill Gates post though. Oh no! I'm so sorry. I've poisoned my mind. One day we might do a whole podcast on this person, and it's going to be possibly libelous.
Anyway, the wider point is 24 quid for a bottle of wine at Wimbledon is not that bad in the grand scheme of their otherwise heinous prices.
So you buy a pint and it's £6.50, and I literally said to somebody there, I was like, oh yeah, pint's only £6.50, and they looked at me like I was green. Unfortunately, that is what living in London does to you. This kind of absurdity becomes normal. Oh, you only pay £750 a month rent, do you? Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I mean,
£6.50 for a pint is much worse than 24 quid for a bottle of wine in my book.
To be honest, I don't go out I don't buy bottles of wine out that often. I think that's the problem. Anyway, I think we got distracted again. Good tournament, Wimbledon. Good bunch of blokes. Always said it. Speaking of good
storylines as well.
I think I will just come back on what we were talking about before the break there, because I was thinking when we were in the break. Just quickly, this idea that Djokovic is the best grass court player ever. I can't express it, and I did say that it's not really a grass court. And I think if Djokovic would have played, if Wimbledon was played on the same courts as Queen's or Eastbourne, I think the outcome of those Wimbledons in the last 10 years are different.
I suppose, Murray's won a lot at Queen's, and Berrettini got to the final, and he obviously won Queen's last year, and I think has this absurd record at Queen's. Eastbourne, not that many good men play it, so it's hard to tell. But you've played on both courts, Calvin. I trust that, George.
I was going to say, Borg was pretty successful at Wimbledon, wasn't he? And they described him in the documentary as like the best server versus the best returner at the time. Are there any kind of links between the two?
Borg got a huge serve as well, though. This is a strange thing with Borg when we think about him as a baseliner. If you actually watch the Borg McEnroe matches in full, Borg is serve and volleying nearly every point. He just played on the baseline because he played at. He was a baseliner on the clay, and he did play from the baseline quite a bit on the grass. But I think what I'm getting at is that when you have the US Open, I mean, the run up to that, everything is on hard, and there's not much difference in the paces of the US hard courts. They're pretty much the same courts as they're going to play on at the US Open. And the clay, and the run up to the French Open, there's differences in speed, but they're clay
Madrid
courts.
obviously is the big difference.
But Wimbledon is a different court. It's an entirely different feel of court to all the other grass court tournaments in the run up. And I think that's what I'm getting to.
Interesting stuff. I mean, I also find it bizarre, speaking of surfaces generally, that there are now players playing on 3 different surfaces in tournaments this week. You know, you've got Bastad and Gustad and Dustad and Sustad and all the other stads where there are clay court tournaments this week. You've got, and we'll come on to in a moment, Andy Murray playing on the grass in Newport, Rhode Island. And then obviously you've got a whole host of hard court tournaments going on as well. It's a bizarre... I mean, I do think this is potentially the worst week of the season.
Is there a hard court tournament going on this week?
I mean, I've just said that actually, and I have presumed that there is. I mean, there must be a hard court challenger. There's always a hard court challenger.
Yeah, maybe a challenger, yeah.
Atlanta starts next week. There isn't a ATP level. That I think I might be pushing it to challenger, which, to be honest, even I would struggle to defend myself on that because, like, there's challengers all the time. And actually, I'm struggling to find a hard court challenger this week. There's one in Rome, USA, on indoor hard, which I mean, it's a Challenger 80, which is like the lowest level of Challenger, right?
Is Newport the only grass tournament this week?
Yes, surely. Well, let's talk about Newport because Andy Murray is out there, and it stops me waffling on about hardcourt tournaments that no one cares about. He beat Sam Querrey 2-love in the first round in a bizarrely one-sided match. I think there is something more going on there.
Revenge for 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I think much like 2017, only one player was fit. He then beat Max Purcell in the second round, coming from 6-4 down the first set, and then he won 2-1 in the second and third set. Max Purcell always a tricky guy to play against, as Liam Brody was pointing out on Twitter. And then he was beaten by Alexander Bublik 7-5, 6-4. I mean, George, positive to go and pick up some more ranking points, but losing to Bublik is not a great result, is it?
4 times they've played this year.
You can't avoid him. I mean,
2-2 this year. I mean, Bublik's just random, isn't he? I mean, just don't want to
he's
play
not.
him when he's
Yeah, of course he's
out.
random, but he's not that good.
I don't know. I think he's got a lot about him in terms of kind of lights out tennis. He can take the racket out of your hand. I didn't watch this match, admittedly, so I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what happened. But he's got a massive serve. He struggles to focus a little bit. You'd expect Murray. Pete Murray would pick Bublik apart all the time. Don't get me wrong, but this Murray.
I thought you said Pete Murray there. I was like, who's
Pete
Pete
Murray?
Has he got another brother that I've just never
Duncan
heard?
Murray. Pete, this one. Pete Murray would pull Bublik's pants down. I think they played at Wimbledon in 2017, didn't they? And that was like 1, 2, and 4 or something. But
I mean, this is a pretty rogue decision to go and play Newport. I appreciate he's going to go and play Atlanta and Washington and train with Lendl probably in Florida.
So rankings push, surely.
Yeah, but he, 35 ranking points to spend an extra week, or he had to spend 2 more weeks on grass because he was at Wimbledon in the second week of Wimbledon hitting, and then he went to Newport, and so he's been an extra 15 days on grass. I mean, Calvin, is that really worth it for 35 ranking points when he could have started his hardcourt training block earlier and been fully ready for Atlanta next week?
I think he probably thought he was going to get more than that. I think he probably fancied. I mean, Newport's usually quite weak. It's actually probably stronger this year than I can remember it.
Yeah.
But I think he probably thought it was an easy win, that one. First 2 rounds have probably not been that difficult. I know Purcell's difficult. He's tricky to play against, but not in terms of ranking. And then it's a bit unlucky to come up against Bublik, who, like George says, I'd favour Murray to beat him about 60% of the time, but he does have the ability to just take the racket out of your hand.
you got to think as well. I mean, had he won the tournament 250 points, that probably would have confirmed the seeding at the US. Given
I'm not
if Novak doesn't play,
convinced about that.
You're going to get 35 points for quarters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a 250, right? So
You get, like Henry gets 25 if he wins the final tomorrow.
well, that's where Andy Murray should have been. Really, should have been at Roehampton playing the 25k.
Good point, yeah. Good point.
I'm just looking. I'm wondering if Murray might have been defending some points from last year, which means that he was only like improving by 35. But I'm fairly sure that is the distribution at a 250. I mean, it is brutal, right? Like it always is. It drops off pretty quickly once you start losing at that stage. Let's talk about another player who's coming back from injury, shall we? Because George has... Well, I was hoping George wouldn't have mentioned his name yet, but somehow he already has. Dominic Thiem snapped his losing streak and then some. Absolutely remarkable to see his name on the right side of the results again. He picked up wins in 2 consecutive tournaments. Would you believe it? He beat... Who did he beat?
Rusevori.
Thank you very much.
And
Emil
Bautista
Rusevori. And Roberto Bautista Agut. I mean, to be honest, George, both very creditable results.
Yeah, 2 grinding 3-setters. Lost to Baez in the quarters, who's having quite a good season. Baez,
Are you trying to say Sebastian Baez? Is that what you're trying to say?
Baez. It's like a government department.
It's what they play snooker on, isn't
You're
it?
going to say he's got a snooker table.
Baez. Yeah, he's having a pretty decent little season, isn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah,
So.
I mean, team was always far too good to be on this sort of streak. I'm not going to risk my reputation by throwing him into the mix for the US Open. But
Well, you threw him into the mix for Wimbledon. He didn't even play.
I would never throw him in the mix for Wimbledon. He's poor at Wimbledon.
You definitely considered it.
Never. But yeah, I mean, hopefully this is the start of him getting back to where he should be. I think the top of the game would really benefit from a fit and firing Dominic Thiem in terms of another style, another, contrast to what we've kind of got there.
And he's part of the lost generation, right? Like he'd
say he's found. He's got a Grand Slam title. That's pretty good.
I hesitate to say this because it's a level of privilege that comes with growing up in the GOAT era, but only one. Like, is it fair to say only one, Calvin? I mean, there are some great players who only have 1 Grand Slam title, but could you really end your career if you're Dominic Thiem?
Potro's only got 1.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say Del Potro. But if he ends his career with 1 Grand Slam title, like, come on.
I mean, Del Potro lost about 5 years of his career.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it, how injuries work? I was just thinking there when you mentioned Baez that Baez should have beaten Zverev at the French Open, and Zverev came back, and it was like a big comeback to win that. And if he hadn't done, he'd probably be playing right now and have a chance. It's funny because he came back and won that match. He's probably out for the whole summer. Although I notice he's back. He's back walking.
Yeah, I mean, walking very tentatively. I mean, he's on the entry list. I think he's on the entry list for Toronto. Oh, wait, which one is it? The Rogers Cup. That's the cheating way of saying it. And I'd be very surprised if he plays that.
Absolutely not. I mean, Thiem, to be fair, I mean, if you look back in his career, we're always talking about context. I mean, he's made, 4 Grand Slam finals? He's lost twice to Nadal on clay and once to Novak Djokovic at the Australian Open. I mean,
could argue he should have lost the one he won as well, given the
he was terrible in the one he won and the one he should have won. But as Calvin says, you got to win the matches when you play badly.
Thiem was brilliant at always beating one of Nadal or Djokovic at a slam, and then not beating it, and then not quite beating the other one.
Yeah. He's played some decent slam finals. I mean, the match with Djokovic, he played pretty well. And I remember I was at the French in. What year was that? 2019. That was a pretty good match.
When he got a set.
Yeah, but that he had to work bloody hard for that set. I mean, that was a really high standard.
Then the Aussie Open when he lost to Djokovic in the final.
Just a sidetrack, if anyone fancies it. Best player only to have won, best male player to have only won 1 Grand Slam.
Did Roddick only win one?
Yeah, he won US Open.
Del Potro, Roddick. I mean, I'm going to throw some other names in there. Carlos Moya, Yannick Noah, Pat Cash.
Del Potro.
I'm going to struggle to get this audience off Del Potro. Let us know at Love Tennis Pod and lovetennispod@gmail.com if you reckon you've got someone who's a better single Grand Slam winner in the men's game. There are far more of them in the women's game, which is why...
I was going to say, who's the best women's ones? There's probably too many to...
I mean, yeah, maybe that's one for next week. Let us know on Twitter or on email who you think the best women's...
Rybakina is currently the best one. She's going to win lots more.
I think there's some recency bias there, George. Do also let us know on Twitter if you've been enjoying Match Point Tennis Championships, or if you haven't. Frankly, I'd just be interested to know whether people have been playing it. I mean, I've just been sent a lovely projector by a company who make big projectors, so I've been having it's great, a 70-inch screen on my living room wall. It's amazing.
Wow.
So I was playing online the other day. I've got my ranking now. I think I've got a ranking 167. It's an ELO system, so I don't know how good that is, but I haven't played online since my qualifiers. It is a great game. They've been sponsoring us throughout Wimbledon. This is probably the last time we talk about it, at least seriously, but I wanted to say thanks very much to them. Thanks so much to all of you who got involved and got in touch and say you're going to play it. It's been great to hear from you, and I will get some games in with you as well once I put my embarrassing, very old gamer tag on Twitter. It's an immersive tennis sim. It's got a load of licensed players. You can create your own player as well and play your way around the world. And as George always says, it does really feel like you're playing tennis. So,
what's the username then, James? Come on.
I'm actually not going to reveal it at this point. I'm not ready for it.
It can't be that bad.
I'm not ready to go through it. I'm afraid it's just not something that I'm ready to do, George. It was a long, long time ago when I had designs on acquiring a nickname for myself, and that is all I'm going to say about it. We haven't got much.
I can't even think what that's going to be.
No, you will never guess it in a million years. Calvin, I did say in the intro, and therefore I should follow through on my promise, that you would very briefly tell us what you've been up to this week. Pat and Cash, another title. And I'll tell you what I'm going to ask you. They've won the doubles title at Roehampton. They've won a boatload of doubles titles this summer. I mean, do you still all get excited when you win a title? Or is it like, here we go, this does not slip, on to the next one?
This was a bit weird one to say. The players who they played in the final had to withdraw. So they didn't... one of the guys was playing a German league match and he had a flight to Germany. So he could only play the final if Henry won his singles in straight sets. And he didn't.
That's so weird.
Good tactic from Henry. Let the other guy have a sit to just get the walkover.
Yeah, respect that. Yeah.
Coached him well.
But no, I mean it's been a bit of a dip in the doubles. As is expected. They've got through the matches. They've been a bit of a battle, to be honest, but they've got through it. But guys at this level, they don't make loads of money, and there's prize money for winning doubles. So you've got to take the money when you can.
Yeah, and we won't talk too much because Henry's got a final tomorrow, and we don't want to jinx it or reveal any game plans to the thousands of fans of his opponent, who I'm sure will be tuning in for any nuggets they can get out of you, George. I
was just going to say, what's have you got like an ambition for the end of the year, Calvin, of what you'd like them to be kind of doing?
They're going to go out and play 3 challenges in the States, which are 3 pretty strong challenges. You basically get all the players who don't get in the Masters Series. So Canada, Toronto, like Vancouver. There's a challenger in Vancouver that's one of the strongest challenges of the year because it's the week before US Open qualies.
Right.
So anybody who's not still in Cincinnati at that stage will play that challenger usually. So I guess it's just a case of getting up towards the 100 mark. And then there's those 3 in the States, and then I think it's probably back to Europe for the start of the indoors, or maybe there's still a few outdoor hard challenges. I don't know. I
don't want to overpipe them at all because it's not fair, and they're into the top 150 for the first time I think next week, which is great. But where does main draw cutoff tend to fall? Or even Grand Slam qualies cutoff tend to fall in terms of direct entry?
You don't have qualies for doubles.
Oh, that's right.
So main draw cutoff for slams is 150 combined. So
Okay.
So it's the combined ranking of the two players. So basically, if both players are ranked 75, you'll just sneak in usually.
Right. So they would probably have to still cut their ranking in half.
Oh yeah, substantially, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is where the doubles gets difficult because it requires both of them to do that. Which if they're playing together, they can only do that. They'll only get the same points. Their points are basically similar. But what tends to happen, why I think people think that doubles players split up from partners willingly, and that's not really how it works. If say for example there's a player ranked 30 in the world whose potential partner gets injured the week before, and then he asks a player who's ranked 120 to play with him, the player who's ranked 120 wouldn't get in with his usual partner, so he would then go and play with the guy who's ranked 30, for example, to try and get in.
Yeah, it all gets a little bit complicated, doesn't it? But that's the car keys in the bowl world of doubles, eh? What a time to be alive. I've got one more thing to say before I ask George if he's got any other business, which is a very brief congratulations to Maria Sharapova, who in the last couple of hours has announced that she's given birth to a baby boy, Theodore, she's called him, which, for those who don't know, means gift from God in Greek. She says the most beautiful, challenging and rewarding gift our little family could ask for. So congrats to her and her partner. George, any other Bellshaw business?
I just wanted to ask Calvin one question because we missed him last week and you and I had a difference of opinion on this, James. Will Ons Jabeur win a Grand Slam, Calvin?
Great question.
What do I always say about women's tennis, George? I don't know. My feeling would be no, but I wouldn't say that with any confidence. If you'd asked me a year ago, would Emma Raducanu win a Grand Slam? I'd say no. Would Rybakina win a Slam? Probably not. But it doesn't work to any logic. Like, there'll be 2 of the Grand Slams next year will be won by 2 players who, if we all named 10 players now, there'll be 2 slams won next year by 2 players who won't make any of the 30 players.
That's a big claim. Do you not think Swiatek will start mopping a little bit?
I think, as I said the other week,
there'll be 2 random ones. She's not just going to win, George. There's only one woman who's ever won all 4 slams in the. Oh, 2 is there? There's Steffi and Serena. Serena done it.
She did a Serena Slam, didn't she?
Yeah, she's done a Serena Djokovic Slam, but not a calendar one.
Yeah.
Not on the calendar, right? There's only Steffi Graf that's ever done the calendar one, so I doubt Swiatek's going to do it.
Sure, but she might win 3. Might win the French and both the hard.
Yeah,
ones.
but then there'll be one then that's won by some randomer.
I'm trying to pick out, I sometimes do this with WTA when I scan my way down to sort of 25 to 45 and try and pick out a really rogue name. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Elise Cornet won Wimbledon next year, or Alison Van Uytvanck, or, I don't know, Clara Tauson.
This is the thing what throws the fantasy tennis into chaos, though, isn't it? It's always the men's qualifier and the women's winner that decides it, because everything else is usually pretty inconsequential and most people have the same.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, I've been thinking about that a lot, and the scoring system is going to get a tweak next year. I can't tweak it mid-year because there's people, you for example, Georgia.
I've got an idea, James, as to something that you should do actually with it.
Exciting.
I think the wild card should go in with the qualifiers.
I have thought about this a lot, and basically the problem is that sometimes you just get, Andy Murray gets a wild card, and it's like, well, he's obviously a far better bet than all the qualifiers. But yes, I agree. We might just need a wildcard category, to be honest. That might be the other answer.
Yeah, but is he though? When he's been the wild card, he's not done any better than what the qualifiers would hope for. He's won a round. Yeah. He's won the odd round, and he's an anomaly, isn't it? There's no more Andy Murrays hanging around injured.
No. Yeah.
Roger Federer.
Well, I mean, Roger Federer will need a wild card
next year.
And on that bombshell, I think it's probably time to end. Thank you so much for listening, as always. We've had record numbers of you listening over the last 3 weeks, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have every single one of you, even 80s Villager and his ever-changing review of our podcast. Please do keep coming back, 80s Villager, because I know that next week you'll like us more or maybe less.
I think it's going down towards 1 star from 5, isn't it?
I mean, he will be back. He's going to bounce. There is a dead cat bounce in his opinion of us, I've no doubt. And we were very nice about Rafa Nadal today, so I'm sure that'll make a difference.
Sports Social Podcast Network.